So, thank you everybody for connecting to this webinar. And we are very thankful to our dear Sukadev ji to give us beautiful lecture about Hatha Yoga Pradipika and its significance. And because this is the source of all Hatha yogic practices. And first of all, I would like to introduce great master of yoga, Sukadev Bretz, and he is the successor of great master of yoga, Swami Vishnudevananda, who was disciple of Swami Shivananda. And as you know, Swami Shivananda was a great master in India and really established yoga on a scientific level and on a very high level of performance and knowledge. And his main three disciples, Swami Narayanananda, he went to Denmark, and then Swami Satyananda opened the Bihar School of Yoga, and Swami Vishnudevananda was also working many years together with Sukadev ji, and Sukadev ji established the Yoga Vidya organization, which is the biggest organization for yoga in Europe. And also Sukadev ji is managing that organization with fantastic organizational power. We can say intelligence of nature in applied manner to organize such a big organization, which is the biggest ashram outside of India regarding yoga. In his place, Bad Meinberg in Germany, in the north of Germany, I had a privilege and a few times to visit that place and participate on the international yoga congresses each November that Sukadev ji organized with thousands of participants. And we are very happy that we can have him today to share his wisdom about Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Thank you, Sukadev ji. And please give us your wisdom.
Namaste, Hari Om, and welcome to my presentation of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, one of the oldest texts on Hatha Yoga, ancient wisdom for modern times. I'm grateful to His Excellency, the Ambassador of India to Croatia, Mr. Rajkumar Srivastava, to organize this fortnightly online sessions on yoga, and I'm especially grateful to Yogacharya Yadranko Miklec for inviting me. I've known Yadranka for many years, and he's been our honored guest and presenter during our yoga congresses in our Yoga Vidya Ashram Germany, and I'm very happy that I just heard 1 or 2 weeks ago that his main book is also been translated into German. So I'm happy about that, and all of you who know Yadranko, you know he's a great master, and you can be you can feel very happy that you have such a person who can help and guide you. Today I want to speak about the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Yoga, as most of you know, means union. And Hatha Yoga is the most popular aspect of yoga in the West. More and more people in the whole world are practicing Hatha Yoga. Now in the times of the pandemic, Hatha Yoga has proven even more important than ever. The word Hatha has different meanings. I think most of you will be aware that Ha stands for sun, Ta stands for moon, and Hatha Yoga is like you could say, harmony between active, outgoing tendency, the sun and Ha, and the ingoing tendency, Ta, meaning the moon and intuition and going inside and recharging. You need this Ta energy going inside to do Ha, to do something in the outside. But there's another meaning of Hatha Yoga. The word Hatha also means effort or discipline. It also means force. It means you apply some energy to get more energy. You do something which is discipline to get more out of it. I want to present an ancient text. I'm sure most of you will have heard about it. Some of you might even know it. And if Yadranko allows me to share my screen, then I can show you just a few slides. Okay. So you could say Hatha Yoga is ancient. Nobody knows how old it is. Indologists say Hatha Yoga is only maybe 1000 years old. But you can also find some treatises on Pranayama and on some asanas in the Upanishadic texts or in the Itihasas. But you could also say there are three main roots of Hatha Yoga. One is Ayurveda, the second is Raja Yoga, and the third is Kundalini Yoga. You can say Ayurveda is the Indian health system, is the Indian system of medicine. So in India, Hatha Yoga was always practiced for good health. So an Ayurveda on one hand side is a curing of diseases, and the second is to live a healthy lifestyle so you will not get disease. And in that way, Hatha Yoga, and this also the Hatha Yoga text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, also sometimes gives some effects of Hatha Yoga on health. It says this and this posture will work on this and this disease or will prevent diseases. The second root of Hatha Yoga is Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga is the yoga of mind control. Literally, it means the royal yoga or the yoga of control or also of ruling. Raja Yoga says, in order to concentrate your mind, in order to master your mind, you need to do some physical exercises like asana, pranayama, and so on. So, as we will see, the author of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika says, to master your mind, practice Hatha Yoga. You could also say, in order to have a quiet mind, in order to have a happy mind, in order to have an energetic mind, you can practice Hatha Yoga. And in the ancient text on Raja Yoga, the Yoga Sutra, you find quite some remarks on Pranayama. And in the third chapter, you get some hints on some asanas and effects of it. The third root of Hatha Yoga is Kundalini Yoga. Kundalini Yoga, in the classical sense, is the yoga of energy. Kundalini Yoga says there's prana, the life force, you have chakras, energy centers, you have nadis, energy channels, and if you want to achieve anything in life, you need more prana, more energy. You need to open your chakras so you can have everything what you need to unfold your potential. And you need to open the nadis, the energy channels, so there will not be any blockages. And in the end, you want to awaken the Kundalini, and if you awaken the Kundalini, the dormant energy inside you, then you'll reach higher planes of consciousness, and finally, moksha, liberation. All of these you find in this text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Now, this text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, is just a few hundred verses. It's written between the 10th and the 16th century AD, so of our times. So you could say not as old as other yoga texts, but it's one of the oldest texts on Hatha Yoga. Now, Indologists today say most like the 15th century. Others say till 10th century. so one doesn't know exactly. Yeah, there's an author of this, he's called Yogi Svatmarama. Svatmarama means the one who rejoices in his own self. Atma means self, Sva is own self, Rama here means the one who rejoices. So this means Svatmarama was a self-realized being. He had all the joy and the energy inside him, and he wants to share it. Actually, the text sometimes is just called Hatha Pradipika, and Pradipika literally means light. So you can also say it's like on Hatha, light on Hatha Yoga. Or you could also say how to achieve inner light by effort. If you say Hatha as effort, Hatha Pradipika, how you can achieve inner light by doing the proper effort. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika has 4 different chapters, and by having an overview of these 4 chapters, you see that the Hatha Yoga itself goes far beyond just asanas, as probably all of you are aware. First chapter it's on about the basics of Hatha Yoga. Say what is Hatha Yoga, why you practice Hatha Yoga, and who can practice Hatha Yoga. Then it comes to asanas, so the postures, then the yamas and niyamas, meaning the ethics and morals that you should follow as an yoga aspirant, and quite a few verses on diet. So it says what you could eat and what you should not eat to have better success in Hatha Yoga. The second chapter is on Prana, Pranayama and Kriyas. So it describes what is Prana, and it says that in order to increase Prana, you should practice Pranayama. And Pranayama is the breathing exercises. By practicing Pranayama, you can increase your Prana. When you increase your Prana, then you have more energy, you can have a stronger mind, and if you elevate your Prana on higher levels, your mind will be elevated. He also says you only have life as long as you have Prana. So this means not only your physical life will end when you don't have Prana, but it also means you can feel quite alive if you do pranayama. You could say some people are like walking dead and others vibrate with energy. Some people have natural pranayama, prana, and they have it somehow, and others can increase their prana, their energy level, their charisma, their radiance by practicing pranayama. And he also talks about the kriyas in the sense of purification exercises. So in order to be healthy and in order to make pranayama more efficient, you can do certain cleansing techniques. Third chapter is on Kundalini and mudras. There he describes what is Kundalini. He describes why you want to awaken the Kundalini. He describes what's happening when you awaken the Kundalini. And he describes certain mudras, certain techniques. So it's not in Hatha Yoga Pradipika mudras is not finger mudras. We could say it's whole body mudras. It's combined energy awakening practices and energy harmonizing practices, which, if you are purified enough, will lead to the awakening of Kundalini. The fourth chapter is on Dhyana, Samadhi and Kaivalya. Dhyana means meditation. So he describes some meditation techniques, and he describes Samadhi. and says how you will come from dhyana to samadhi and what the effects are on samadhi. And he speaks about kaivalya, liberation, and final liberation. So the fourth chapter describes meditation, you could say. Now assume most of you will have some knowledge of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, so you know about Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama. Then you probably miss two words which actually are not especially described, like Pratyahara and Dharana. Now, Pratyahara, in the Hatha Yoga sense, you could say is the deep relaxation technique, Shavasana, which is also described. And Dharana, of course, is part of dhyana, concentration before you enter deep meditation. So these are the 4 chapters. So, of course, I cannot talk about all the different verses, but I will start with the first 2 verses of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. I will first read it in the Sanskrit. Yogis believe recitation of a text will also help to get into the spirit of the text. And the Hatha Yoga Pradipika is also written in shlokas. This means it's meant for recitation, and by reciting Hatha Yoga Pradipika, you can have some energy effect. Om, Om, Om. Shri Adinathaya namostu tasmai yeno padishta Hatha Yoga Vidya Vibhajate Pronata Raja Yogam Arodhum Ichur Adhirohiniva Pranamya Shri Gurum Natham Svatma Ramena Yogina Kevalam Raja Yogaya Hatha Vidyopadishyati. So these are the 2 first verses, and I will just read the English translation and then say a few words about it. So it says, Salutation to Adinatha, who expounded the knowledge of Hatha Yoga, which like a staircase leads the aspirant to the high pinnacled Raja Yoga. So he first starts by salutation to Adinatha. Adinatha means the first master. And the tradition says it's Shiva. That Shiva, the divine itself, revealed the knowledge of Hatha Yoga. So the Hatha Yoga is said not to have been invented by certain people, but you could say some great yoga masters entered into higher states of consciousness, and the science of Hatha Yoga revealed itself to these great masters. And it will lead the aspirant step by step, like a staircase, to Raja Yoga. This means mastery of the mind and full union. Next verses. Yogin Svatmarama, after saluting his first Guru Sri Adinatha, explains Hatha Yoga for the attainment of Raja Yoga. Maybe I can also let you and show these verses. So first he says, what is Hatha Yoga about? Why do we practice Hatha Yoga? We practice Hatha Yoga to reach to Raja Yoga. So even though I said Hatha Yoga has 3 main roots, and even today some practice Hatha Yoga for health, either to heal, cure diseases, or for prevention of diseases, Ayurveda. Second is Raja Yoga, to get quietness of mind, to master your mind. And third, Kundalini Yoga, you could also say, just to get more energy. So if maybe some of you are yoga teachers, if you would ask your students, why do you practice Hatha Yoga, they will usually either say, I have headaches, back problems and so on, and I want to get rid of it, or they'll say, I want to stay healthy or feel good, so that's all Ayurveda, or they say, I want to have more quiet of mind, I have so much stress and I need some quietness, I want to deal with all that, or maybe today with all this lockdown and corona, very difficult, I want to find a way to deal with it, to feel happy and to feel more happy and have a quiet mind, Raja Yoga. And some will say, I want to have more energy, and after visiting just one trial class, I felt so vibrant and so vital, so much vitality. So that's why I continue practicing. Satmarama here says he mainly wants to say it for the attainment of Raja Yoga. But even if he says so, in many verses, he explains which Hatha Yoga practice is good against which disease. And he also explains about Prana, Nadis and Chakras or Kundalini Yoga. The third verse is, owing to the darkness arising from the multiplicity of opinions, people are unable to know the Raja Yoga. Compassionate Svatmarama composes the Hatha Yoga Pradipika like a torch to dispel it. And you could say there are many people who follow different doctrines. And in India, you had the Shaivas and the Vaishnavas and the Shaktas, and you had the Buddhists and the Jains, and at Svatmarama's time you had the Muslims, you even had Christians in India. There have been Christians in the 1st century AD, and they can all quarrel about. And then in classical Hinduism, you have dualistic philosophy, non-dualistic, modified philosophy, dualistic philosophy, non-dual. He said, well, it doesn't really matter which your religion and your philosophy is, just practice Hatha Yoga, then you will get control of your mind, and then light will come. So Svatmarama says, theory is not that important. Practice is important. Now I'm going to skip quite a few verses. In the 10th verse, he says, maybe I'll make it a little bigger here. In the 10th verse, he says, like a house protecting one from the heat of the sun, Hatha Yoga protects its practitioner from the burning heat of the 3 tapas. It is like a supporting tortoise, as it were, for those who are constantly devoted to the practice of yoga. So he says a few important things here. First, it says, Hatha Yoga protects you from 3 kinds of suffering. Tapa actually means suffering. You have suffering of the physical body, you have suffering of the mind and the emotions, and you have spiritual sufferings. Some people have physical diseases, or some have tensions in the physical body. So Hatha Yoga will help. Others have emotional problems, or unrest in the mind, or some anxiety, and they don't even know what is the source. So some mental problems. So you don't need to be mentally ill, but actually today in these times, I think quite a few people have good reasons to be worried about many things. And the third is, you could say, spiritual suffering. Spiritual suffering means you you might have what is needed on a material level, but there is some inner void. You know, something is missing. Or something happened in your life which put you the meaning, which somehow had an effect on the meaning of life. Or you had some work and you were fully dedicated to it, and then suddenly you lost your work and you ask, so what is the meaning of all? So much effort I put in from one day of the other, it's over. Or you have a family and maybe your children reach the age of 18 or 20 and they leave home. You suffer from empty nest syndrome, and you know, now what is now the meaning of life? Child is out of the house, goes its own ways. What will be there? Or everything is completely fine, but you feel some void. So spiritual suffering can be there. So whatever there is, Hatha Yoga will help. And it says it's like a supporting tortoise. Now, you need to understand that example of the supporting tortoise. In the Indian mythology, there are many different myths, and one is Vishnu, so one of the gods. He manifests as a tortoise, and then to support the whole world. So, meaning, it doesn't matter what other practices you do. You might practice meditation, or you might practice prayer, or you might have some other religious or spiritual practice of a completely different tradition, like Zen or Buddhist practice or whatever. So Hatha Yoga is a good foundation. It's supportive of everything. So you can practice Hatha Yoga and anything also. Then he also says, for devoted to the practice of yoga. So Hatha Yoga doesn't promise some magical pill that you just need to take, but you need to practice. You need to be devoted to the practice of yoga. Then you learn how to get over any kind of suffering. Now I'll skip a few verses so that I can come to the Yamas and Niyamas. Yamas and Niyamas is the ethics. I'll just mention them briefly. It says the 10 Yamas are, so he speaks of 10 Yamas. If you know the Yoga Sutra, you know Patanjali speaks of 5 Yamas, but Svatmarama has 10 Yamas. Ahimsa, non-injury, Satya, truthfulness, Asteya, non-stealing, Brahmacharya, I usually translate it with avoiding of sexual misbehavior. Then you have Daya, this means compassion, and first Kshama, this means forgiveness. Then Dhriti, this means endurance. Daya means compassion. And then you have Ajava, meekness, Mitahara, a good diet, and Shaucha, cleanliness. So he says these things are helpful for the Hatha Yoga. Then he speaks about the 10 niyamas. So he talks about tapas, this means discipline, and then santosha means patience or contentment, astika, belief in any kind of divine being, God, then dana, charity, giving, then Ishvara Pujana, adoration to God or to a higher principle, then Siddhanta, Vakya, Shravana, hearing discourses of the principles of, well, he says religion, but actually on the principles of yoga and of higher spiritual life. Then comes Rimati, shame, you could say, is adhering to social norms and behavior. Then comes Rimati Tapo Hutam, as it means also when intelligent tapas, also intelligent discipline, and Huta Yajna, this means fire ceremonies. So I don't want to go through everything. Basically, it means Hatha Yoga should also be practiced with an ethical behavior. And it's also important because Hatha Yoga gives you power, it awakens energy, it gives you mental powers. You could also misuse these powers. You can practice Pranayama, you can practice Asanas, or the more advanced techniques like bandhas and mudras. Then you achieve some mental power. And if you achieve this mental power, you could also use your power for negative things. You can influence others, you can get sexual favors from others, or you can get power, and so on. So there are a lot of, whenever you have power, power can be abused. And Hatha Yoga can increase power. So that's why before he mentions any of the practices, he says, observe ethics and morals. Be aware that you want to do good, like dana, do good, that you're compassionate, and that you're truthful, and be humble and forgiving. Then he speaks about the asanas. And I take the first verse on asana is here. Being the first accessory of Hatha Yoga, asana is described first. It should be practiced for gaining steady posture, health, and lightness of body. So when you practice asanas, he says you should practice it for health, of course. We should practice it for steady posture. This means when you later sit for meditation, it will be easier to sit for meditation if we practice Hatha Yoga. And we want to feel light. Any of you who practices Hatha Yoga, you know, the feeling after a yoga class is different than if you go to the gym. After the yoga class, you feel light. So that's how you should practice the Hatha Yoga. I'm going to want to go to one of the postures, which is called the Matsyendrasana. Well, he said, having placed the right foot at the root of the left thigh, let the toe be grasped with the right hand and passing over the back, and having placed the left foot on the right thigh at its root, let it be grasped with the left hand passing behind the back. So I don't know whether you can follow. Basically, it means do the spinal twist. I assume you know the spinal twist? So if you know Hatha Yoga, you will know it. And now it says, what does it do? He says here, it increases appetite and is an instrument for destroying the group of the most deadly diseases. Its practice awakens the Kundalini, stops the nectar from the moon in people, or you could also say it creates calmness of mind. So now the expressions he uses here are also quite interesting. So first he says, it increases the inner fire. So when you do Hatha Yoga, now you see here, he talks in terms of Ayurveda. When you take Ayurveda, you have different basics for diseases. One is, you could say, Ayurveda source or causes of disease. So you first have a lack of Agni. Agni is digestive fire. Many of you will know about Ayurveda, and if you have some disease, usually the Ayurvedic doctor will tell you you need to increase your Agni. Usually it's done by taking ginger or taking some Ayurvedic medicine and drinking hot water and so on. But you can also do Hatha yoga practice like Spinal Twist, forward bend, Paschimottanasana, Mayurasana, Peacock, or some of the Pranayama. The second is Doshas out of balance. And there are three doshas, as you know, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And Hatha yoga, the asanas will help the doshas to get back to their balance. And especially three practices Svatmarama prescribes to balance out all the three doshas, which is spinal twist, forward bend, and peacock. So these will help to put the doshas back into balance. And the third is, which is called ama, or sometimes also mala. This means accumulation of waste products in the body, or you could say accumulation of things in the body which shouldn't be there. So by Hatha yoga wants to help all of these three. So when we take this verse on the spinal twist, we can see he talks in the terminology of the Ayurveda. It says it increases Agni, it removes the causes of diseases, the excess of the doshas, and removes the blockages. But he doesn't stop there, but he also talks about that Ardha Matsyendrasana also awakens the Kundalini, and then it stops the nectar from shedding from the moon in people, or you could also say it creates Chandra Sthiratva. This means steady mind. So you could also say, I think a better translation than this English translation, it helps to steady the mind. So exemplarily, you can see Hatha Svatmarama says all the asanas help for health by increasing Agni, improving your digestion, by having a balance in your Baya energies, the doshas, and by removing the malas and doshas, malas and the amas, this meaning the blockages. And then afterwards, it helps to awaken Kundalini, and it helps to a quiet mind. You can also use this verse for concentration, like he talks about increasing Agni, so you can first concentrate on your abdomen when you're on spinal twist and feel the warmth in your abdomen. And secondly, you can concentrate on your spine, the Sushumna, where the energy will move up. And third, you can concentrate on your third eye, where the seat of the higher mind is, and in that way you'll get the full benefit. So you can interpret these verses in many different ways. Now just shortly on the second chapter. Second chapter goes on Pranayama. This is the Tvitiyopadesha, so the second instruction. And there he says, posture becoming established. So if you practice asanas for a while, a yogi should master himself, and he should eat salutary and moderate food, which usually means no meat, no fish, no alcoholic beverages. And then he should practice pranayama as instructed by his guru. To learn pranayama, it's good to have a teacher because it's even more important than with asanas. Of course, today, I don't know how it is in Croatia, whether normal yoga classes are taking place. In Germany, in some cities, yoga classes can take place. In others, they can't. Our ashram is just right now in lockdown. And so we do everything live online. But you can teach live online, especially if it's easy. If you're a student, you can also, as a teacher, you can see the student. Then, if the breath is being disturbed, the mind becomes disturbed. By restraining respiration, the yogi gets steadiness of mind. So here he says, why is it good to practice pranayama? Because by making the breathing steady, you can also make the mind steady. Next verse he says, as long as air stays in the body, it's called life. Death consists in the passing out of the breathing air. It is therefore necessary to restrain the breath. Now these verses are also some playing with words, because the same name, Vayu, means breath, it means air, and it also means prana, life energy. So, as long as life energy is in the body, you're alive. And some people, as I said, are like walking dead. This means they have little prana in their body. And because they have little prana in the body, so they're not much alive. But if you do pranayama, then you can have more energy. And he says, the prana, I prefer to call it now prana, the prana does not pass through the middle channel sushumna, owing to the impurities of the nadis, the energy channels. How can then success be attained? And how can there be unmani avastha? This means the highest state of consciousness. So he says, when the whole system of nadis, which is full of impurities, is cleaned, then the yogi becomes able to control the prana. So first you have to remove the blockages in the nadis, in the energy channels, and then you can control the prana easily. So of course, how will you control, how will you clean the nadis? Partially you clean the nadis by the proper diet, partially you clean the nadis by practicing asanas, partially you clean the nadis by using mantras, but then you clean the nadis with alternate nostril breathing, so with anuloma, viloma, which he will explain in the next verses. And I will skip these verses, but first I will read the next verse. Therefore, pranayama should be performed daily with sattvika buddhi. This means with an elevated mind, in order to drive out the impurities of the sushumna. This means when you do pranayama, concentration is also necessary. It's not enough to just do inhale, retain, exhale, and watching TV at the same time or checking your WhatsApps or emails. If you want to have the benefits of the pranayama and also of the asanas, you should be concentrated on something elevating, like on a chakra, like visualizing light, or feeling the energy which will be awakened while you practice. So I remember when I was with my master, I asked him quite often, how should I do this practice? Where should I put my hands? How is Mula Bandha precisely done? How is exactly Jalandhara Bandha? And quite often he said, don't worry too much about physical details. Concentration of mind is most important. Now I go to the third chapter. Third chapter goes on Kundalini and on mudras. And here he says, as the chief of the snakes is the support of the earth with all the mountains and forests on it, so all the tantras rest on the Kundalini. Now again he's referring to some mythology which for the Indian reader is obvious in the first view. Now for European readers is not so obvious, but basically he says all the different yogic practices rest on the Kundalini. The Kundalini is awakened, then we enter higher states of consciousness. If the Kundalini is not awakened, we stay in an earthly state of consciousness. Then he says, when the sleeping Kundalini awakens by the favor of a guru, then all the lotuses, so all the chakras and all the knots are pierced through. There is also some element of grace when you practice. Hatha yoga is disciplined and is practice. If you want to go anywhere in Hatha yoga, you need to practice every day. I recommend for those with little time, practice every day something, and once a week go into a yoga class. And if it's not physically possible to go to a yoga class, then go to one online yoga class. So you have every day maybe 15 minutes something, and once a week you do something for 1.5 hours. In addition to that, do some meditation. For the more serious practitioner, I usually say, spend at least 1 hour every day in your spiritual practices, asana, pranayama, and meditation. And once a week, do more. And that way you make good progress. So practice is one thing, but sometimes there's also this element of some grace. The guru can be a physical master, but you can also go directly towards the divine or your higher self and connect yourself with it, and then you feel there's some grace happening. Then he says, in order to awaken the divine goddess, meaning the Kundalini, meaning this inner energy, who is sleeping at the entrance of Brahma Dvara, the door to the divine. Brahma here stands for the divine, stands for actually the highest self. Mudras should be practiced well. Now to the fourth chapter. Fourth chapter, he says, go direct to the second verse. Now I will describe a regular method of attaining to samadhi, which destroys death, is the means of obtaining happiness, and gives the Brahmananda. So he says in the fourth chapter, I'll tell you how to reach samadhi. And samadhi helps to destroy death. Of course, physical death cannot be prevented. Anything which is born will also die. But the yogis have realized there's some eternal principle in us. There's some divine principle which has been before physical birth and will stay after physical death. And by reaching samadhi, higher states of consciousness, you'll experience yourself as being beyond death. And in that way you'll reach true happiness, Brahmananda, the happiness of Brahman. This means the happiness of unconditional being. External happiness can be taken away immediately. You might be happy in the presence of somebody, and then if he goes on traveling or she, then you don't have that happiness anymore. Or you have the happiness of being somebody's nice to you or praises you, and it comes and goes. But the happiness of the divine, it stays there all the time. Svatmarama finishes with the last verse. You see, in 1 hour I can only give the beginning of the chapters and I can say the last verse of the chapter. He says, as long as the prana does not enter and flow in the middle channel, so this is Shumna, and the bindu does not become firm by the control of the movements of the prana, also this inner energy is not steady. As long as the mind does not assume the form of Brahman without any effort in contemplation, so long all the talk of knowledge and wisdom is merely the nonsensible babbling of a madman. He's a little bit polemic here. You might know about Jnana Yoga, Vedanta, and there the great masters say by knowledge you attain the liberation. And here he says, talking about knowledge, or you could also say talking about philosophy, talking about theology, talking about spirituality, does not make much sense if you don't experience it. Once you experience higher states of consciousness, then you understand everything. If you don't reach higher states of consciousness, then you're babbling like a madman. So now I've babbled for nearly an hour, but I've babbled not for the babbling purpose, but so to give you some overview of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and maybe give you a little incentive to practice a little more. If summarizing, if you want to have a healthy body, it's good to practice Hatha Yoga. If you suffer from some diseases, it's good to practice Hatha Yoga. If you want to prevent other diseases, practice Hatha Yoga. If you need more energy, practice Hatha Yoga. If you want a quiet mind, or if you want to have higher states of beings, practice Hatha Yoga. And if you practice other practices from other spiritual systems, it's good. You can have Hatha Yoga as some basis, some grounding, and you can practice everything else as well. And if you have a physical problem, some physical problems, some doctors are helpful, but Hatha Yoga can be a basics even for other medical treatments. If you practice a little Hatha Yoga, you'll have some energy, some health, and some quietness of mind. If you want to have more energy, stronger mind, and more health, then practice more Hatha Yoga. And so I'm grateful for you that you gave me the opportunity to speak on this important text. Thank you very much for Yadranko to having invited me, and you can be very happy that you have Yadranko as an excellent teacher who can teach you the practical things you need to achieve these states of that yoga wants to lead you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sukadev ji, that you gave us in 1 hour the proper knowledge about yoga or pramana, proper knowledge of life and approach to life. And as we know from Maharishi Patanjali, pramana is consisting of pratyaksha, direct experience, which you can gain only through the practice. And then anumana and agamaha. So because you can't do practice instead of us, you gave us pramana, you gave us the anumana and agamaha, the proper understanding of the text and our experiences that we can relate, our experiences which we gain through the practice to that ancient text of yoga as agamaha. So thank you very much for that. In spite of that we didn't do the practice, but you filled that gap, which is very important to have a proper knowledge, to have understanding, and be understanding being authentic, related to the ancient text. And so that we know we are moving in a proper direction. And but as you said, practice is very important. Nobody can practice instead of us. It must be our own doing. And that's why, as Patanjali says, the practice should be regular and with enthusiasm. And then all the experiences we are having will enrich our life with all these benefits of purifying the nadis and the body, and balancing the doshas, and strengthening the agni, and normalizing the health of the body, bringing peace to the mind, and finally making able to reach self-realization. So thank you for this holistic knowledge very much, Sukadevji. And I would like to convey many greetings to you from His Excellency Ambassador Rajkumar Srivastava in Croatia, because he apologized. He couldn't connect because he was today in a very busy schedule of the meetings. But he sends many greetings to all participants, and especially to you, and for cooperating for this beautiful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also, please give my regards to His Excellency.
Yes, yes, I will convey. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And it was a beautiful event. Thank you.
Thank you. Good practice. Wonderful. Nice to see you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
And again, thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for practicing.